Valuable as it is, work cannot be endless. Tireless striving cannot last, and those who persist will inevitably fall to exhaustion. So God, in His wisdom, showed us a better way, His own way, to step back, take a breath, and rest. Rest is a gift, a necessary rhythm for all who toil, a holy interruption to the sweat of one's brow, where we pause and reconnect with the heartbeat of our Father. Rest is a calling, a command to release our need for control, an admission that God is our true provider, and His world will continue to turn even as we sleep. So rest, beloved, and know that the work will continue. Tomorrow, our labor will carry on, and the task at hand will be completed in due time. But for now, embrace His blessing and rest.
Hello, and I hope you've been having a blessed Christmas time over these past few days. If you've been attending or watching online, or perhaps you've caught some of our social media posts, you will know that this week is our BVC service team Rest Week. So, before I get into anything, again, a huge thank you to all of you who have served faithfully in BVC in this past year. We literally would not be a church without you guys. So, to practice what we preach in terms of having a rest week, this is why we're doing things a little bit differently today in having this short message with you now. As you've probably gathered, what I would like to talk to you about today is rest, because this is the time of year where basically everybody, or almost everybody in most circumstances, will have some amount of time off to take a break, to see family, to see friends, or perhaps to travel. And so really what we want to encourage you to do over this Christmas time is to rest. So that's what we're going to talk about today, like I said. Right from the very beginning of time, recorded for us in the first book of the Bible, Genesis, we see that God is already emphasizing rest. Genesis 2, verse 3. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy. In it He rested from all the work of creating that He had done. A little further on in the next book, Exodus, we again see God instructing His people through Moses to rest. This is Exodus 16. Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. That is why on the sixth day He gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where they are on that seventh day. No one is to go out to work or to gather. So the people rested on that seventh day. That word Sabbath, maybe you've not come across it before, is derived from a Hebrew word, Shabbat, which means to rest. So if I mention that word again, you'll know what we're talking about. Another few chapters later in that same book, Exodus, we see that rest is deemed so important that it actually becomes part of the 10 Commandments. Exodus 20, verse 8 says this: Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, set apart. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. Jumping forward from the Old Testament to the New, we see Jesus reiterating this concept of rest. In Mark 2, then He, Jesus, said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Jesus is clarifying here that rest was not about following rules. This Sabbath day was not just another rule to check off, but it was the intentionality behind it, the heart behind it that was important. There was a spiritual and a physical value to taking rest. The point is, from way back at the beginning of time, right up to our present day, God still calls us and even instructs us to rest. Now you might say, oh, well, that's all great, that's very idealistic, but don't know about you, I have things to do. Me too. Believe me, there's plenty to do. We all have things to do. Now at a basic level, we all know that rest enables us to keep going. With family, with work, relationships, with study and so on. And our bodies literally get tired, we start yawning, we even fall asleep to show us we need rest. Yet, we can find ourselves all too often saying, I've too much to do. X, Y, and Z is so important. I have to do it. I have no time for this rest nonsense. If that's you, I would ask you, do you think Jesus worked hard? Do you think Jesus had a lot to do? A lot of important things to do? He had the most important work to do on the planet. Yet, we read of times when Jesus was tired, when he did rest, and even needed to sleep, just like any of us. History is forever marked with the impact of all the effort and all the work and all the important things that Jesus did. But look at this. Luke chapter 5. This is verse 15. News about him, Jesus, spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Rest is such an important concept, but we so willingly neglect it. Whether it's an overpacked social life or work life, it maybe sounds impressive when you say, oh, I have so many things to do, I never stop, I can't stop. We may even feel a bit prideful when we can say our calendar is packed, potentially even boast in it. But as that introduction video said, eventually, even the most driven person will succumb to overwork and over busyness. Either you will burn out, your health will suffer, your relationships will suffer, or maybe you'll turn to something to help you cope in the short term that will be very harmful in the long term. Professional fighters class themselves as some of the hardest workers on the planet. They have to do a lot. But it's interesting, if you ever look at a fighter at the beginning of their career, they'll say things like, I outwork everyone, nobody works as hard as me, I'm in the gym 24/7. Yet, if you listen to how they speak a little later on in their career, when they're better, more wise, more experienced, they actually talk about not overtraining, not leaving it all in the gym, but actually being careful to recover, to rest, to listen to the nutritional advice, the biological warning signs, listen to the advice from their coaches, to rest when they need so that they can perform at their peak. You and I are no different in that sense. Yet we can so easily ignore the instruction from God to rest, and we slip into the mindset of busy is best. A question I want to leave hanging with you today. You may not like me after it. If you are uncomfortable with rest, what are you not dealing with? I'll leave that with you. This leads me on to my next point about being intentional about rest. Jesus says this in Matthew 11. You probably know this. Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. We find rest through Jesus. Rest from restlessness. Notice, it is something we must be intentional about. It is not passive. It doesn't just happen. We have to do something to be fully at rest, and that is to come under the guidance and leading of Jesus in our lives. Take my yoke, take my burden. Might sound a little bit strange that there is still some level of effort or engagement involved in finding rest. Why doesn't Jesus just give us a pair of flip-flops and a towel and say, right, you trust in me now, it's the beach for you for the rest of your days, get some R&R for the rest of your life. He doesn't say that because Jesus is being 100% realistic about life. He's not sugarcoating it, making a false promise that everything will be okay just because we believe in him and trust him. But he is telling us we can find rest despite the difficulties or stresses we will face. John chapter 16 verse 33, Jesus says, I have told you these things, referring to his arrest and even his death, so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. In other words, I'm telling you this is how it's going to be. There will be difficulties, but trust in me completely, and even in those difficulties, you can still find rest for your mind. So please, don't lose your peace in a difficulty thinking God doesn't care about me, or the God thing doesn't work for me. He doesn't know me. God is aware. He sees the full picture, while we only see through the small window of our life. Yet, even in that small window of life that we have, God has made a way for you to find rest throughout that life. Isaiah chapter 26 and verse 3 says this, you will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast, because they trust in you. Trust in the Lord forever, for the Lord himself, is the rock eternal. Considering this big picture, we are also reminded that the rest we can begin to enter now is just a taste, a preview of what is to come, our eternal rest. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 9. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. To expound on this thought a little bit, allow me to read from the Matthew Henry Biblical Commentary. He says this, every true believer has ceased from his own works of righteousness and from the burdensome works of the law, as God and Christ have ceased from their works of creation and redemption. Basically, when we trust, there is an eternal security, an eternal hope, and an eternal rest in God. We don't have to burden ourselves with the weight of trying to earn our place in the world, earn our place in God's kingdom. We don't need to drown in the things that happen to us or that people might try and put on us. Even if we are mistreated or hurt in this life, we still have that rock solid truth. We have a twofold hope. Comfort for now through the Holy Spirit, the church Jesus has placed us in, and God's promises in his word. And secondly, we have comfort for the future in anticipating our eternal rest in perfection with God. There is rest, not just in the shape of an escape from some of the troubles of this world, the problems of this world, but there is also a justice for all that has been done wrong. God will bring all things to light at the right time. So, you and I leave the weight of the burden of judgment to God's way, and you focus on learning from the way of Jesus. That is, forgiving and not allowing the enemy of your soul to steal your rest with anger, bitterness, resentment, hurt, and stress. Before I close, let me wish you a restful Christmas break for the remainder of it, and a restful New Year. And remind you that we are back in house next week, Sunday the 5th of January, to kick off 2025 with a new series. We look forward to seeing you there, or here. But finally, you have obviously taken some time out of your schedule to watch this short message. I hope you found it encouraging and perhaps even in itself somewhat restful. But considering this theme of rest, I would ask you, no matter how much you have to do today, would you commit to intentionally spending the next few minutes together meditating on one of the most renowned and precious scriptures in the Bible that talks about rest? That is Psalm 23. Thank you for joining me. God bless you all, and make sure to get some rest.